They set him up thinking it would be a joke. A single father, tired from life, carrying responsibilities heavier than his age, sent on a blind date not out of kindness, but out of mockery. Across the table sat a deaf girl, judged before a word was ever spoken. What was meant to be laughter at someone else's expense slowly turned into silence, then reflection, and finally tears. Because in that simple meeting, compassion spoke louder than words, dignity shattered stereotypes, and one man's actions reminded everyone what real humanity looks like. Judgment has a quiet cruelty to it, a way of arriving before facts, before stories, before understanding. It slips into rooms ahead of people and decides who they are worth, how much space they deserve, and whether their presence should be taken seriously. In the moment someone is judged, they are reduced to a surface-level label, a rumor, a flaw, or a difference that others find amusing or inconvenient. Judgment does not ask questions, it assumes answers. It does not wait to listen, it rushes to speak. And when judgment is wrapped in humor, it becomes even more dangerous, because laughter disguises harm as entertainment, and humiliation as harmless fun. The single father in the story was not invited into that blind date as a human being with a history, sacrifices, and emotional weight. He was invited as a setup, a punchline waiting to happen, someone others believed would unknowingly participate in his own embarrassment. Humiliation works by stripping people of dignity in front of an audience, whether that audience is a room full of people or a silent group watching from a distance. It thrives on imbalance, on power held by those who feel superior, more normal, more complete, or more deserving. In this case, judgment targeted two lives at once. The man was judged as desperate, lonely, and easy to mock because he was a single dad. The woman was judged as less capable, less desirable, and less worthy of genuine effort because she was deaf. Neither judgment came from knowing them. Both came from assumptions formed by people who never planned to sit at the table themselves. Judgment often hides behind the excuse of just a joke, but jokes that depend on someone else's dignity being lowered are not jokes at all. They are social weapons. Empathy, by contrast, enters quietly. It does not announce itself or demand attention. Empathy begins with the decision to see another person fully, not selectively, where judgment asks, "What is wrong with you?" Empathy asks, "What have you been carrying?" Empathy recognizes that every person arrives with an unseen story shaped by loss, effort, disappointment, hope, and survival. The single father did not walk into that date as a character in someone else's joke. He walked in as a man who had learned responsibility the hard way, who had likely sacrificed personal dreams for the well-being of his child, who understood patience because life had forced him to learn it. Empathy allowed him to recognize the humanity across the table from him, not the label others had attached to her. Judgment tends to focus on deficits, on what people lack according to narrow social standards. Empathy focuses on presence, on what people bring into a moment regardless of limitations or differences. The deaf woman was not a challenge to be endured or an awkward situation to escape. Through empathy, she became a person deserving respect, effort, and genuine connection. Empathy does not require shared circumstances, it requires shared humanity. It asks us to step outside our own comfort and convenience and meet someone where they are, not where we wish they would be. In doing so, empathy dismantles the very foundation judgment stands on, because judgment cannot survive in the presence of understanding. When someone chooses empathy in a moment designed for humiliation, the power dynamics shift. The joke collapses, the audience loses control, the people who expected embarrassment are forced into silence because empathy refuses to perform. The man's actions on that date were not loud or dramatic. They were intentional. Every effort to communicate, every sign of patience, every moment of respect became a quiet protest against the cruelty of the setup. Empathy transformed the situation from an act of mockery into an act of dignity. It exposed the emptiness of judgment without ever needing to confront it directly. Humiliation leaves marks that are not always visible. It teaches people to shrink, to doubt their worth, to brace themselves for ridicule before entering new spaces. Empathy does the opposite. It restores. It tells people they are safe to exist as they are, without apology. For someone who has lived under the weight of judgment, Empathy can feel shocking, even unreal. It can bring tears not because of sadness, but because of relief. The relief of not being laughed at. The relief of being taken seriously. The relief of being seen. That emotional response is not weakness, it is the natural reaction to dignity after deprivation. Judgment is efficient but shallow. It allows people to categorize quickly and move on without emotional investment. Empathy is slower and requires effort. It asks for attention, patience, and vulnerability. That is why empathy is rarer, but also why it is transformative. In choosing empathy, the single father did not just change the tone of the date, he revealed the moral failure of those who arranged it. Without saying a word to them, his behavior held up a mirror. It showed that the real deficiency in the room was not deafness, not single parenthood, but a lack of compassion. Empathy has the power to reverse shame. Shame thrives in secrecy and judgment, convincing people they deserve to be hidden or laughed at. Empathy brings experiences into the light and says, "You are not the problem." In moments like this, empathy becomes an act of courage. It risks awkwardness. It risks misunderstanding. It risks standing alone. But it also builds bridges where judgment builds walls. The effort to communicate, to slow down, to learn another way of connecting sends a message far stronger than words. You are worth the work. Judgment often comes from fear, fear of difference, fear of discomfort, fear of confronting our own limitations. Mockery becomes a defense mechanism, a way to distance ourselves from what we do not understand. Empathy requires facing that fear and choosing curiosity instead. The man on that date did not need to be perfect or fluent in sign language to be empathetic. He needed only the willingness to try, to listen with his eyes, to respect pauses, to accept silence without filling it with assumptions. That willingness turned an expected failure into a moment of profound humanity. Empathy also carries responsibility. Once we see someone clearly, we can no longer pretend ignorance. We can no longer excuse cruelty as humor. We become accountable for how we treat others and how we allow others to be treated. The people who expected laughter were left with tears not because the situation became tragic, but because it became truthful. Truth has a way of unsettling those who benefit from shallow judgments. It exposes the gap between who we think we are and how we actually behave. Judgment isolates. It separates people into categories of us and them. Empathy connects. It collapses those categories and reminds us that circumstances can change, abilities can shift, and roles can reverse at any moment. The single father's empathy may have been shaped by his own experiences of being judged, of being looked at differently because of his family situation, his responsibilities, or his perceived limitations. Empathy often grows in those who know what it feels like to be misunderstood. It becomes a quiet vow not to pass on the same harm. In choosing empathy, the man reclaimed agency over a situation meant to control him. He refused to be the object of a joke and instead became the subject of a moral lesson. Empathy does not erase pain, but it prevents pain from multiplying. It stops humiliation from spreading and interrupts cycles of cruelty. When one person acts with empathy, it forces others to confront their own choices. Silence replaces laughter. Reflection replaces mockery. Tears replace jokes not because empathy shames people intentionally, but because it awakens conscience. Empathy does not require grand gestures. It is found in small decisions, staying present, making eye contact, adjusting pace, offering respect without conditions. These small acts accumulate into something powerful. They challenge social norms that prioritize convenience over care and entertainment over ethics. Empathy redefines strength, not as dominance or superiority, but as the ability to protect dignity even when no one is watching. Judgment humiliated because it was designed to. Empathy healed because it chose to. Healing does not always mean fixing or rescuing. Sometimes it simply means refusing to add to the harm. In that refusal, something shifts. People remember what they witnessed not because it was dramatic, but because it was rare. Genuine empathy stands out in a world accustomed to quick judgments and shallow laughter. It lingers in memory, unsettling and inspiring at the same time. When empathy enters a space built for humiliation, it exposes how unnecessary cruelty truly is. It shows that kindness was always an option, that respect was always available, that the joke was never required. The tears at the end of that encounter were not just for what happened in that moment, but for the realization of how often judgment has been chosen instead of empathy. How many moments could have been different? How many people could have been spared quiet pain if someone had simply decided to see them as fully human, to meet them without assumptions, to choose understanding over amusement, presence over performance, dignity over laughter, and to act not from what society expects, but from what conscience quietly asks in moments when no one thinks it matters, but it always does. Because empathy does not end humiliation once and for all, yet every time it is chosen it creates a pause in cruelty, a crack in indifference, a moment where healing becomes possible and continues unfolding through actions that speak without sound, gestures that carry meaning beyond words, and choices that ripple outward long after the room is emptied, and the story has been told again and again, each time reminding us that judgment may arrive first, but empathy, when invited, has the power to stay and reshape everything that follows. True character is not announced, it is observed. It does not introduce itself with titles, achievements, or carefully chosen words. It reveals itself quietly, most clearly in moments when there is nothing to gain and no applause expected. How a person treats the vulnerable exposes layers of the heart that polished behavior in public spaces can never fully hide. The vulnerable include those who cannot easily defend themselves, those who are different, those who are overlooked, mocked, ignored, or underestimated. In such encounters, people often believe no one is watching, that their actions carry no consequence. Yet these are the exact moments where character steps forward, unfiltered and honest. Vulnerability makes people uncomfortable because it challenges the illusion of control and superiority. When faced with someone who is weaker in social standing, physical ability, or emotional safety, there is a choice to be made. One can either exploit that imbalance or protect against it. Many choose indifference, which is often just cruelty in a quieter form. Others choose mockery, disguising disrespect as humor to avoid accountability. But a rare few choose care, not because it is easy, but because it aligns with who they truly are. The way someone responds in that split-second decision says more about them than years of carefully managed appearances. The single father in this story had every excuse to withdraw. He could have played along, minimized effort, or ended the interaction quickly, protecting himself from embarrassment. Society would have understood. No one would have blamed him for refusing to engage deeply in a situation designed to humiliate. Yet true character does not look for exits when the vulnerable are involved. It looks for responsibility. He recognized vulnerability across the table, not as an inconvenience, but as a call to act with integrity. His response was not driven by obligation or sympathy alone, but by respect. Respect for the vulnerable is never about pity. Pity creates distance. Respect creates equality. When people treat vulnerability with pity, they remain above it, emotionally detached, offering help without true connection. But when they treat vulnerability with respect, they step onto the same human ground. The deaf woman did not need to be tolerated or managed, she needed to be engaged with as a whole person. True character understands that vulnerability does not reduce worth. It reveals courage, resilience, and depth that often go unseen by those too focused on surface-level traits. The treatment of the vulnerable is often influenced by whether someone believes dignity is conditional. Many operate under the assumption that dignity must be earned through productivity, conformity, or strength. Under this belief system, those who fall outside the norm become easy targets for neglect or ridicule. True character rejects that idea entirely. It recognizes dignity as inherent, not transactional. A person does not need to perform, impress, or compensate for differences to deserve respect. This understanding reshapes behavior at the most fundamental level, guiding actions even when there is no reward. Moments involving vulnerability remove the mask of social performance. People stop acting how they think they should act and start acting how they truly feel. If impatience emerges, it was always there. If kindness appears effortlessly, it was rooted deep within. Vulnerability acts as a mirror, reflecting back the values someone carries internally. The man's willingness to slow down, to adapt his communication, to remain present without frustration demonstrated patience, not as a practice skill, but as a natural extension of his character. True character does not rush. It understands that vulnerability often requires time, silence, and adjustment. Rushing is often a sign of discomfort, an attempt to escape the emotional responsibility of the moment. Taking time communicates safety. It says without words that the other person is not a burden. In a world obsessed with efficiency, choosing to slow down for someone who cannot keep up with the expected pace becomes a radical act of respect. That decision alone separates performative goodness from authentic character. How people treat the vulnerable also reveals how they view power. Power can be used to dominate, to control narratives, to decide whose experiences matter, or it can be used to protect, to include, to level the ground. The single father held social power in that situation, even if he did not seek it. He could hear, he could leave, he could disengage. Instead, he used that power to create balance rather than advantage. True character is not threatened by equality, it is expressed through it. Often, vulnerability triggers fear of association. People worry about being judged themselves for engaging too deeply, for appearing awkward, for aligning with those considered undesirable by social standards. True character does not outsource its values to public opinion. It does not calculate kindness based on potential embarrassment. It acts according to internal conviction rather than external approval. That independence of moral judgment is rare and unmistakable when it appears. The vulnerable often become measuring tools without their consent. They reveal who is compassionate and who is performative, who is present and who is merely polite. Politeness can be maintained at a distance. True character closes that distance. It listens actively, adjusts behavior, and remains open even when interaction requires effort. These adjustments are not signs of weakness. They are signs of strength grounded in empathy. Treating the vulnerable with dignity also requires humility. It demands acknowledging that anyone can become vulnerable under different circumstances. Illness, loss, age, and unexpected change can shift roles quickly. True character understands impermanence and responds not with superiority, but with solidarity. There is an unspoken recognition that today's strength does not guarantee tomorrow's stability. And therefore kindness is not charity, but foresight. The emotional response of those who witness the man's behavior speaks volumes. Tears often emerge when people are confronted with a truth they have avoided. Watching someone act with integrity toward the vulnerable exposes the absence of that integrity elsewhere. It brings discomfort because it removes excuses. If kindness was possible in that moment, then cruelty was a choice, not a mistake. True character does not accuse, it reveals, and that revelation can be deeply unsettling. Society often rewards confidence, dominance, and speed, while undervaluing patience, gentleness, and attentiveness. Yet it is in gentle moments with vulnerable individuals that the strongest moral fibers are tested. Anyone can be kind when it is convenient. Anyone can appear compassionate when cameras are present. True character emerges when kindness costs something, whether that cost is time, comfort, or social approval. There is also a difference between helping and honoring. Helping can still preserve hierarchy. Honoring recognizes equality. The man did not approach the situation as a savior or a hero. He approached it as a participant, willing to learn and adapt. That willingness communicates respect far more effectively than exaggerated gestures ever could. It affirms the other person's agency rather than overshadowing it. Treating the vulnerable well also means resisting the urge to speak for them or define their experience. True character listens more than it assumes. It leaves room for individuality instead of reducing someone to a category. The deaf woman was not an abstract representation of disability. She was a person with preferences, emotions, humor, and boundaries. Acknowledging that complexity requires attention and care, qualities that cannot be faked for long. The absence of exploitation is just as important as the presence of kindness. True character does not seek emotional credit for decency. It does not turn respectful behavior into a performance. It acts without expectation of recognition. This quiet integrity is what makes such moments powerful. Observers sense authenticity even if they cannot articulate it. That authenticity is what lingers long after the interaction ends. When vulnerable people are treated with dignity, something shifts in the environment. The space becomes safer, not only for them, but for everyone. Others feel permission to lower their defenses, to be more honest, to act more human. True character has a ripple effect, altering group dynamics without a single speech or confrontation. It sets a standard simply by existing. True character does not emerge from moral speeches or inspirational quotes. It is built over time through small decisions that align behavior with values. Those decisions accumulate, shaping instincts that activate automatically when vulnerability appears. In that sense, character is revealed rather than created in these moments. What we see is what has already been cultivated within. The vulnerable remember how they are treated long after details fade. They remember tone, patience, effort, and respect. These memories can either reinforce wounds or contribute to healing. True character understands the weight of these interactions and treats them with seriousness, even when the world dismisses them as insignificant. In choosing to treat the vulnerable with dignity, a person affirms their own humanity as well. Cruelty toward vulnerability diminishes both the target and the one who inflicts it. Respect elevates both. The man's actions did not just protect the woman's dignity, they strengthened his own. That mutual elevation is one of the quiet rewards of integrity. True character does not ask whether someone deserves kindness. It assumes they do. It does not calculate outcomes before acting. It responds instinctively, from a place of values deeply rooted and consistently practiced. In a world where vulnerability is often exploited for humor, power, or convenience, the simple act of treating someone gently becomes a profound moral statement, one that exposes intentions, priorities, and beliefs without ever needing explanation, one that continues to speak through memory, reflection, and the lasting impact it leaves on everyone who witnesses it, reminding them that character is not what we claim when conditions are ideal, but what we demonstrate when faced with someone who depends on our choice to either harm or honor them. Disability is often treated as a defining feature, a single characteristic that people allow to overshadow an entire human being. Society has a habit of reducing individuals to what they cannot do, rather than recognizing the fullness of who they are. This reduction is not caused by disability itself, but by the attitude surrounding it. Worth is not diminished by hearing loss, physical limitation, or neurological difference. Worth is diminished only when attitudes refuse to see beyond those differences. The real barrier is rarely the disability. It is the mindset that frames disability as deficiency instead of variation. From an early age, many people are taught, subtly or directly, that ability equals value. Productivity, speed, independence, and conformity become measures of worth. Anyone who falls outside these narrow standards is treated as less capable, less desirable, or less significant. This belief system is deeply ingrained and often goes unchallenged. As a result, people with disabilities are forced to navigate not only practical challenges, but also constant social judgment. They are met with lowered expectations, unsolicited pity, or outright dismissal, all of which communicate the same harmful message: you are less. Attitudes shape experiences far more powerfully than limitations ever could. When a disability is met with impatience, the interaction becomes strained. When it is met with discomfort, the space becomes isolating. When it is met with mockery, the damage goes deeper, attacking dignity itself. But when disability is met with respect, curiosity, and openness, the interaction transforms. The same difference that once seemed like an obstacle becomes simply one aspect of a complex individual. Nothing about the disability changes in that moment, only the attitude does. The blind date in this story was designed around negative attitudes. The setup relied on the assumption that a deaf woman would be an inconvenience, an awkward experience, or a source of humor. That assumption reveals far more about the people who arranged the date than about the woman herself. They believed her disability defined her value in social and romantic contexts. They assumed effort would not be worth it, that connection would be impossible, and that discomfort would be entertaining. These assumptions are rooted in ignorance, not reality. Disability does not erase personality, intelligence, humor, emotional depth, or the desire for connection. People with disabilities love, dream, contribute, and struggle in ways that are profoundly human. Yet attitudes often prevent others from ever discovering these truths. Instead of asking who someone is, people ask what is wrong with them. Instead of adapting communication, they avoid it. Instead of learning, they judge. These choices build walls that have nothing to do with disability and everything to do with perception. Worth is intrinsic. It does not fluctuate based on sensory ability, mobility, or neurological function. It exists simply because a person exists. When attitudes fail to recognize this, harm follows. People internalize the messages they receive repeatedly. Being treated as less can slowly convince someone that they are less. This psychological burden is often heavier than the disability itself. The struggle becomes not only about navigating the world, but about fighting the erosion of self-worth caused by others' reactions. Attitudes also influence opportunity. When people assume incompetence, they withhold chances. When they assume fragility, they limit independence. When they assume burden, they exclude. These assumptions close doors before individuals ever have the chance to step forward. Disability becomes a justification for inequality, even when the real limitation is the unwillingness to accommodate or include. In this way, attitudes actively create the disadvantages they claim to observe. Positive attitudes, on the other hand, have the power to unlock potential. When differences are approached with flexibility rather than resistance, solutions emerge. Communication adapts, environments adjust, relationships deepen, respect fosters confidence, and confidence fuels participation. None of this requires ignoring disability or pretending it does not exist. It requires acknowledging it without allowing it to dominate perception. Disability can be part of the story without being the entire narrative. The single father's actions demonstrated this distinction clearly. He did not deny the woman's deafness or treat it as irrelevant. He acknowledged it by adjusting his behavior, his pace, and his communication. At the same time, he did not allow it to define her worth or limit the possibility of genuine interaction. His attitude communicated equality rather than charity. He engaged with her not as a problem to solve, but as a person to know. That attitude shifted the entire tone of the encounter. Attitudes are contagious. When one person models respect, others are forced to reconsider their assumptions. The tears that followed were not caused by the disability, but by the realization that the cruelty embedded in the setup was unnecessary. Witnessing dignity in action exposes prejudice without confrontation. It reveals how easily things could have been different if attitudes had been different from the beginning. Society often celebrates inclusion in theory while resisting it in practice. People claim to value diversity but struggle when inclusion requires effort. Disability inclusion is frequently framed as an act of kindness rather than a matter of justice. This framing reinforces the idea that people with disabilities are recipients of generosity instead of holders of rights. True inclusion begins when attitudes shift from obligation to equality, from accommodation as favor to accommodation as fairness. Language reflects attitude. Words like normal, special, or suffering from carry assumptions that shape perception. When disability is constantly associated with tragedy or limitation, it becomes harder for others to imagine disabled individuals as whole, thriving people. Changing attitudes requires changing narratives, telling stories that reflect complexity rather than stereotypes. It requires listening to disabled voices rather than speaking over them. Attitudes also determine whether people see disability as an individual issue or a collective responsibility. When disability is viewed as a personal problem, society feels no obligation to adapt. When it is seen as a natural part of human diversity, responsibility shifts outward. Environments, systems, and behaviors are recognized as either enabling or disabling. This shift in attitude transforms disability from a personal burden into a shared design challenge. Fear plays a significant role in shaping negative attitudes. People fear saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, or confronting their own discomfort. Instead of engaging, they withdraw. This avoidance reinforces separation and misunderstanding. Openness, even when imperfect, does far more good than silence. Willingness to learn communicates respect, while fear-based distance communicates rejection. Attitudes toward disability often reveal deeper beliefs about vulnerability and control. Disability reminds people that bodies and minds are not guaranteed to function forever, that independence is fragile, and that life can change without warning. Rather than confronting this reality, many distance themselves from it emotionally. They project discomfort outward, disguising fear as judgment. In doing so, they dehumanize others to protect their own sense of security. When attitudes change, relationships change. disability becomes a context rather than a conclusion. Conversations become possible. Humor becomes shared rather than directed. Respect replaces assumption. These shifts may seem small, but they accumulate, shaping cultures and communities over time. A single interaction rooted in respect can counter years of negative messaging. The idea that disability defines worth is not only false but dangerous. It creates hierarchies of humanity, where some lives are valued more than others. History shows the devastating consequences of such thinking. Challenging these attitudes is not merely an act of kindness, it is a moral imperative. Recognizing equal worth is the foundation of ethical society. Attitudes are choices, even when they feel automatic. They can be examined, questioned, and changed. Exposure, education, and genuine interaction all play roles in this process. The more people engage with disability without fear or pity, the more their perceptions evolve. Familiarity breaks stereotypes, and understanding replaces assumption. The emotional impact of respectful treatment cannot be overstated. Being seen as worthy without conditions affirms identity and strengthens self-trust. It allows people to show up fully rather than defensively. This emotional safety benefits everyone involved, creating interactions grounded in authenticity rather than performance. Disability does not diminish love, ambition, creativity, or contribution. It does not erase individuality or potential. What diminishes these things are environments and attitudes that refuse to make space. When attitudes shift, barriers fall. What once seemed impossible becomes manageable. What once seemed awkward becomes natural. In the end, disability reveals society's values more than individual limitations. It exposes whether worth is truly believed to be inherent or merely rhetorical. The way people respond in moments of difference reflects what they believe about humanity at its core. Changing attitudes is not about being politically correct or socially approved. It is about aligning behavior with the truth that every person carries equal value regardless of ability. A truth that becomes undeniable when witnessed through actions that choose respect over ridicule, presence over avoidance, effort over excuse, and humanity over hierarchy, continuing to unfold in every interaction where attitudes decide whether difference becomes a barrier or simply another way of being. Human kindness is often misunderstood as a soft or passive virtue, something that requires little courage or strength. In reality, genuine kindness is deliberate, intentional, and often countercultural. It requires awareness, effort, and the willingness to act even when it is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unrewarded. True kindness does not operate on conditions or expectations. It does not wait for someone to deserve it. It does not calculate outcomes or consider personal benefit. Instead, it chooses to act in ways that honor the humanity of others, even when the world seems indifferent, cruel, or dismissive. Kindness has the power to disrupt cycles of cruelty. In a world where mockery, judgment, and indifference are common, an act of genuine care stands out because it is rare. People become accustomed to being dismissed or ridiculed. They anticipate derision, and they often protect themselves by lowering expectations for how they will be treated. When someone responds with unexpected kindness, it breaks that pattern. It creates a moment of clarity, where the recipient sees that not all interactions are transactional, competitive, or judgmental. In this moment, kindness demonstrates that humanity is not defined by cruelty, but by compassion, understanding, and the willingness to act for the good of others. The single father's actions in this story illustrate this principle profoundly. Faced with a situation designed to humiliate him, he could have withdrawn, disengaged, or played along passively. Instead, he chose kindness, not for show, but as a conscious moral decision. He recognized the vulnerability of the deaf woman, the intention behind the setup, and the audience observing it, and he responded with patience, care, and genuine effort. His actions transformed what was meant to be a joke into a lesson in humanity. This is the essence of kindness. It acts even when external pressures, social expectations, or potential embarrassment suggest otherwise. Kindness requires empathy, but it is not the same thing as empathy. Empathy involves understanding and sharing the feelings of others, imagining what it is like to walk in someone else's shoes. Kindness takes that understanding and turns it into action. It moves beyond feeling to doing. It is the bridge between awareness and tangible support, the space where insight becomes intervention. Without action, empathy risks becoming passive, even self-indulgent, because understanding alone does not alleviate the challenges, discomforts, or injustices others face. True kindness translates thought into gesture, theory into practice, and concern into tangible, meaningful acts. Moreover, kindness is a reflection of inner strength, not weakness. Many people avoid kindness because it exposes them to vulnerability. It requires patience, emotional presence, and resilience. When kindness involves those who are marginalized, misunderstood, or different, it can be even more challenging. Society often rewards dominance, wit, or efficiency, but it rarely celebrates patience, gentleness, or attentive care. Choosing kindness in a world that undervalues it demonstrates courage because it stands against the current of convenience and social approval. Kindness also has a ripple effect. One small act can influence perceptions, behaviors, and attitudes far beyond the immediate context. When the single father treated the deaf woman with patience and respect, he modeled behavior that disrupted the assumptions of everyone observing. His kindness exposed the cruelty of the setup, challenged stereotypes, and reshaped social dynamics in that room. Witnessing genuine care can inspire others to act similarly, even subconsciously, creating a chain of ethical and compassionate responses that extend far beyond a single moment. Importantly, kindness does not require perfection. It does not demand flawless execution or constant effort. What matters is intention and consistency. Small acts, slowing down, listening actively, adjusting communication, offering respect, accumulate into profound impact. These gestures may appear minor on the surface, but their effect on the recipient's sense of dignity, safety, and self-worth is substantial. Kindness is measured not in grandeur but in attentiveness to the human experience and the courage to respond with care in moments where it is easiest to ignore, avoid, or mock. Choosing kindness is also an exercise in humility. It requires recognizing that one's own comfort, pride, or convenience is secondary to the dignity and emotional safety of others. This can be challenging, particularly in environments that encourage self-interest, competition, or social hierarchy. Humility enables people to set aside ego, fear, or prejudice, and to act from a place of moral clarity. It transforms kindness from an optional behavior into a principle guiding decision-making and interaction. Kindness does not mean enabling harm or compromising boundaries. It does not equate to submission, weakness, or passivity. Instead, it is strength tempered by compassion. It involves discernment, choosing when, how, and to whom to extend care. It requires maintaining integrity, understanding limits, and acting in ways that are constructive rather than performative. In the story, the father's kindness was deliberate, attentive, and protective. It was not about winning praise or validation, but about honoring the dignity of the person in front of him. The psychological impact of kindness is profound. For the recipient, it affirms worth, reinforces dignity, and restores trust in human decency. People who experience unexpected care often respond with openness, gratitude, and even tears, not of sadness, but of release, relief, and recognition. These emotional responses are powerful because they reflect the contrast between habitual neglect, judgment, or ridicule, and the radical act of being treated with genuine consideration. Kindness validates presence and affirms the inherent value of being human. Kindness also affects the giver. Acting with compassion strengthens character, builds empathy, and cultivates a sense of purpose. It provides a moral compass, guiding decisions and interactions even in ambiguous or challenging situations. It fosters patience, resilience, and emotional intelligence. Moreover, when kindness is consistent, it creates habits that shape identity, transforming people into reliable sources of support, understanding, and moral clarity within their communities. The story highlights how kindness can challenge societal norms. The audience expected humor, embarrassment, and superficial interaction. They expected the single father to conform to the role assigned to him. By responding with kindness, he disrupted the script. He demonstrated that actions motivated by integrity and care can overpower expectations, undermine ridicule, and expose the limitations of cruelty. Kindness, in this sense, is transformative because it operates beyond the individual. It reshapes social dynamics, perceptions, and cultural assumptions. Kindness requires patience, especially in moments of tension or misunderstanding. When interacting with someone who has a disability, differences in communication pace or understanding can test patience. Acting with kindness means slowing down, listening actively, repeating when necessary, and creating space for comprehension and comfort. These actions may seem small, but they reflect a commitment to the other person's experience. Patience in kindness is an acknowledgement that the worth of others is not determined by speed, convenience, or efficiency. Kindness is also about choice. Every interaction presents opportunities to act with care or disregard. The difference between humiliation and healing often lies in this choice. People can choose mockery, indifference, or avoidance, or they can choose empathy, understanding, and tangible care. The single father's decisions illustrate that kindness is intentional. It is not automatic. It is a series of deliberate actions informed by moral clarity and a commitment to human dignity. In addition, kindness communicates values without words. Actions often speak louder than speech, and consistent care conveys principles that transcend verbal explanation. By treating the deaf woman with attention, patience, and respect, he demonstrated the priority of humanity over entertainment, dignity over mockery, and connection over superficial judgment. Observers recognized the discrepancy between the setup's intention and the father's actions, and this recognition triggered reflection, humility, and emotional response. Kindness, therefore, has a subtle but undeniable power to educate and influence by example rather than instruction. Kindness is relational. It builds trust, fosters connection, and nurtures collaboration. In the context of vulnerability, kindness is both protective and empowering. It allows the person receiving care to participate fully in interactions, to express themselves without fear of ridicule, and to engage authentically. By responding with care, the single father not only preserved dignity, but also created an environment where communication and mutual understanding were possible. This relational aspect demonstrates that kindness is not merely an abstract virtue, but a practical strategy for human connection. The impact of kindness is cumulative. Single acts may seem isolated, but when practiced consistently, they create a culture of respect, empathy, and moral integrity. One person's kindness can ripple through a community, inspiring others to act similarly, challenging norms, and gradually transforming environments that might otherwise tolerate or encourage cruelty. In the story, the father's actions likely influenced not only the immediate participants but also observers, leaving an enduring impression of the power of deliberate care. Kindness is often counterintuitive in environments dominated by cynicism or cruelty. Social pressure, ridicule, or expectations may discourage compassionate behavior, encouraging conformity to norms that prioritize self-interest, entertainment, or dominance. Choosing kindness in these situations requires moral courage, the willingness to stand against prevailing attitudes, risk misunderstanding, and act in accordance with ethical conviction. This courage amplifies the impact of kindness, demonstrating that genuine care is not passive but active, intentional, and transformative. Kindness does not seek recognition or reward. Its motivation lies in the intrinsic value of human dignity. When actions are performed for acknowledgement, they risk becoming performative or conditional. True kindness operates independently of external validation, grounded in an understanding that ethical action is a responsibility rather than a convenience. This selfless quality enhances its authenticity and ensures that it endures, even in the absence of applause or observation. By choosing kindness, individuals model moral clarity. They show that cruelty is optional, that dignity can be preserved, and that human connection is possible, even in adverse or artificial circumstances. In situations designed for humiliation, deliberate kindness exposes the limitations of mockery, dismantles harmful assumptions, and reframes the interaction in terms of respect, empathy, and ethical engagement. Observers are confronted with a living example of integrity, revealing the contrast between superficial judgment and authentic care. Kindness also teaches resilience. It requires sustaining effort, patience, and composure. Even when provoked, tested, or undervalued, it is not a fleeting reaction to comfort, but a sustained commitment to principle. Practicing kindness in challenging circumstances strengthens emotional intelligence, self-control, and moral fortitude. It becomes a habit that informs future interactions, gradually shaping identity, character, and influence. The transformative power of kindness is evident in its ability to move people emotionally. Tears often follow acts of genuine care, not from grief but from recognition of unexpected dignity, safety, or validation. Such responses illustrate the depth of human need for affirmation, respect, and compassionate engagement. Kindness fulfills an essential psychological and social function, bridging gaps, healing wounds, and reinforcing the inherent value of every individual. Kindness is therefore not a passive virtue. It is active, intentional, relational, and transformative. It requires courage, patience, humility, and moral clarity. It disrupts cruelty, challenges assumptions, builds connection, and affirms worth. The single father's actions exemplify the profound impact of kindness, showing that deliberate, compassionate behavior has the power to change the trajectory of interactions, awaken conscience, and inspire reflection, creating a ripple effect that extends beyond the immediate moment into broader social and emotional landscapes, demonstrating that the deliberate choice to act with care can counteract cruelty, uplift the vulnerable, and transform spaces where judgment and mockery were once assumed inevitable, highlighting that kindness is not only an individual act but a catalyst for cultural and ethical transformation, reshaping human behavior and consciousness in ways that endure through memory, example, and ongoing relational influence.